So hello and welcome to the Expat Pod. My name is James, your host. Today I'm joined by Debbie. And Debbie, if you'd like to give us a quick introduction on where you're from, where you've lived and what you do, that'd be great.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. So hi, I'm Debbie. I live in Australia. I moved to London about 18 years ago. Now I'm back to being in Australia again. And I've worked in marketing for my career and in media, publishing and tech.
Wonderful. I'm sure we'll unpack your journey to the UK throughout the podcast. So welcome to section 1 of the podcast, all about getting there. So Debbie, this is where I try and get my guests kind of, inspiration for wanting to live abroad, and then how they, manifested that in certain ways. So let's go back to before you moved. Why did you want to move, and why the UK in particular?
Yeah, so I always had that pull to go to London. Like, it was always there. I think as an Aussie, it's definitely one of those rites of passages that a lot of young Australians do, is like, make that, working holiday visa opportunity and go to live in the UK and travel around Europe. So that was very much my draw. I'd gone and done a couple of Kentucky tours, so the 18 to 35 bus trips around Europe. Spent some time in London as well when I did those, and that just really solidified the fact that I wanted to go over there and live there for a while. And that's how it came about, was really that pull to go overseas and experience different country, different life, and get to travel a lot as well. That was like a key drive.
Incredible. So once you kind of experienced it on your tours, then what was the kind of next steps to go, yes, I loved it. How do I move? What did you do? What did you search for? Did you speak to people who've been before?
Yeah, I did. And actually, even before I did those tours, I remember talking to somebody that I worked with. So when I was in late teens, early 20s, and they'd lived over in London, and it was probably the single best piece of advice I'd been given around traveling, which was because my background is marketing and I was sort of just starting out in my career. And they said to me, get a few more years of doing marketing under your belt before you move to London, because then you'll be able to land a job doing marketing, which will pay more. If you go now, you're probably going to end up working in like a pub or a bar, which obviously there's nothing wrong with that, but it's, a totally different experience. I took that piece of advice. I got a marketing job in Sydney. I worked there for 6 years, and it really was like the best thing was getting, that sort of workplace experience and being able to like build my skills up and then be able to transfer them over to a role in London. So that was key. So that was a big part of it, was building up my marketing expertise. And then it was also around doing research. So this is, early 2000s. I moved to London in 2006, and that was pre-Facebook, pre all the social medias. So there wasn't like the wealth of information at fingertips that there is now. So I was talking to people, it was reading books. I think I devoured most of like the Lonely Planet books that were out there, especially around moving to London and what you should do. And just really took in as much information as I could to be able to like start planning properly for moving over there and setting things in place.
Incredible. Yeah, I love those books. I've got a lot of them which are half read because they're quite useful just to reference quite a lot when you're going somewhere. But yeah, when I moved to Sweden, I got a few for the Nordic countries for sure. That's really good advice as well about spending some time getting marketing experience. I think that's a very good point. I think often the younger you are, the more reactive you are to go and want to live somewhere, but thinking about actually you were right in doing so, in looking at the holistic point of view and going, what might better your chances of having a more comfortable life in your new experiences, rather than, as you said, having to try and make ends meet, because London's very expensive. It's an expensive city. It's pretty hard to afford a comfortable life and explore if you are doing hospitality work, for instance. Unfortunately, it doesn't pay well. So unless you've got parents who are bankrolling you or other forms of income or working 3 jobs, then it might be difficult. So yeah, I think that's a very good point to make, and that's the reality of it. It's really expensive, that city, and it's getting worse, especially rent.
I think, for me, like, hospitality has never been in my personal genes. It's in family members. They work in hospitality and they love it. But for me, like, that's not my life. And so the thought of having to, like, call pints in a bar, I wouldn't have stayed in London very long if that was, what I ended up doing for work. So actually, going over with, sort of skills in, like, my area that I wanted to focus on from a career perspective was, it ended up being, like, the best thing that I ever did.
Completely, yeah, and that's really important. And some people might be the opposite. They may love the hospitality side, but as you said as well, and it might be perfect for them to go and find their feet that way, whilst working in as an intern somewhere and getting experience a bit earlier in life. Everyone's different, but I think in your case it was a good advice you had, which is wonderful. So then, before you moved, once you were applying for this working holiday visa, what was that process like? How did you find it? What did you have to do?
Yeah, to be honest, I can't remember too much about that visa process at the moment. I know it was quite straightforward because it was just for a working holiday, and they were at that time relatively easy to get. And you had to wait. It was like 6 or 8 weeks or something like that from the time when I applied through till when it was actually accepted. There were, like, some key things around it though, which was, making sure that I had a minimum amount of money in my bank account. So part of the visa process was you had to open a UK bank account, which at that time I was able to do through one of the Australian banks. I had a relationship with HSBC, so I was able to open a bank account before I even left Australia, which was great. I saved up, like, the exact amount of money that the UK government required to be, like, the minimum, which I think at that point was just under £2,000, and it was for what was supposed to see through your first 6 weeks being in the country while you're, like, finding somewhere to live and a job. I wish I'd taken more. So I think that was definitely, a learning. Like, definitely the money doesn't stretch as far as what you think it's going to. But yeah, so it was very much like, once I made the decision that I was going to go, it was saving to make sure I had the money. It was saving for a ticket as well. I also did things like I made my mum a power of attorney for me, so that anything that had to be dealt with in Australia, like that related to my bank accounts or anything like that, she had the authority to speak on my behalf. Because again, this is before, international phone calls became free with WhatsApp. It was very expensive to, speak between the UK and Australia. Doing that was also good as well, so that I knew she could, deal with anything that came up, that I wasn't able to deal with when I was overseas. So it was those little things, and then figuring out what I was going to pack and take with me as well. So knowing that I was going overseas at that time for at least 2 years, and having, like, one suitcase to sort of fit everything that you're wanting to take over with you. That was a challenge as well.
Did you have a kind of priority list, like a raincoat, for instance, or?
Yeah. Do you know, I wish I did. I moved in the summer. So I moved in the British summer. So I arrived in June. And what I did do was I didn't take any of my winter clothes at that time. I left a bag behind, all packed and ready to go. And I had my mum ship it to me once I found somewhere to live, and as soon as the weather started to get cooler. So I did have that initial bag that I took over with me, which was more sort of focused on summer clothes, and then had that second sort of shipment that was coming over, a couple of months later, that had more clothes in it, which was also a really good idea, because it meant that, I didn't have to worry about taking absolutely everything, like a raincoat and winter coats, as well as, trying to fit, all the summer stuff and everything into.
And then before you moved, had you kind of found accommodation for your first few nights? Was it a hostel or something, or did you find somewhere else, like friends from home, or?
No. Yeah, I was really lucky. So one of my friends was living in London and had been living in London for a year. She moved over before I did, and very kindly offered for me to stay in her flat share with her. So I ended up sort of sleeping on their lounge room floor for the first 6 weeks that I was in the UK, until I found my own place. So that was great. That one, I knew somebody there who was a very good friend, and two, the fact that, they opened up their home to me, and her flatmates were really accommodating as well and really lovely too. That was like a really nice soft landing in London, not having to deal with like hostels and under that pressure to, find somewhere really quickly and spending a lot of money on accommodation, which is super expensive in London, and having somebody there, to take me in that was great.
Perfect. Was there anything else you had to kind of do before you moved? Did you have any things to sell in Australia, or an apartment to give up or anything like that? Or were you quite, free of any ties?
Pretty free of all ties. I moved when I was in my early 20s. So I, made the choice to live at home until I moved overseas to help with saving money. I think that was another big thing as well. So not moving out and being able to save was great. I owned a car, and I didn't sell it for a few years. Actually, I didn't sell it until I knew that I was going to stay in London longer term. So I wanted to keep it if I was going to come back within, a year or 2 years. My mom ended up driving it around. She sold her car and drove mine around for a while, I thought, because it was there. So, so why not? So that was really good. So I was lucky from that perspective. I think the hardest thing that I had to do, in sort of moving overseas, was leaving my job. I had a job that I loved. I'd been there for 6 years, great friends with, the people I'd worked with. It was a lot of fun. And, if I didn't have like this, sort of pull to go and live overseas, and, it's London, I probably would have stayed there a lot longer. But I think that was the hardest thing, was like walking away from a job that like I really loved into, the complete unknown.
They're wonderful. Is there anything else you kind of needed to do before going abroad, or do you want to kind of move on to the next section?
Yeah, I don't think there was anything else. It was the UK, so I was really lucky I didn't have to be, vaccinated like you do with other countries for, different things, like especially if you're moving somewhere like Africa or into the tropics and, places like that. Not having to learn another language was also great. And it was English, and, that was, that made it a lot more easier as well. So yeah, there wasn't anything else that I had to do before moving. It was pretty straightforward at that time.
Wonderful. Well, then we'll see you for section 2. So welcome back to the podcast, and welcome to section 2 of being there. So Debbie, this is essentially a kind of account of your time living away from home in your new home. So you went from Sydney to London. So, on the surface, quite similar places, English speaking, quite large cities, lots going on, different climates. It's probably the main thing. But when you arrived, what was your kind of first impression like? Yeah,
so I actually really vividly remember like the day that I arrived in London for the first time. And probably because one of the headlines of the newspaper was like, London's in a heat wave. And I was like, what? And it's like 23 degrees. Like, what are they talking about? This is crazy. And made a joke about it with my friend. And she was like, no, you don't know what's about to hit you. And, and I think it was a real interesting sort of 48 hours, like realizing that 24 degrees in London is almost the equivalent of 40 degrees in Sydney. The fact that nowhere had air conditioning and there was no sea breeze to cool you down at any point, and, just how hot the tube gets. I think that was like a first sort of like, oh my goodness, like, okay, it gets hot here. And as you know, Rick's on to talk about weather for sure. And, the same thing happened, winter, it was so cold that, the clothes that I had, brought over from Australia with me, they just weren't warm enough either. So it was like really adjusting to, different climate from that perspective. But those first couple of days, like that very first day that I was in London, I went with my friends and her flatmates, and we had lunch by the river in Hammersmith in one of the pubs. And that was like my first introduction to like pub life in the UK, and how great it is on a hot, sunny summer's day. There's nowhere else in the world that's better than London on like a hot, sunny summer's day for sure. And, sitting outside in the beer garden next to the river. And it was just like a really lovely sort of like first introduction into the country from that perspective. And I'm so pleased that it wasn't grey and raining and miserable. And I did get one of those, as I learned over the next sort of 16 years, very rare summer's days in the UK as like my first day being there. So really happy about that.
Well, yeah, you were very blessed, I suppose. You might have brought the weather with you from Australia. I guess it was winter for you back then, but probably still warmer. Yeah, we don't get heat waves very often, but when we do, the country, it's like the human body. If we go slightly too hot, we stop functioning. It's slightly too cold, we stop functioning. So we have to be like, we have a sweet spot of temperature, about 10 to 25 degrees, I imagine now.
Exactly. And I mean, I have the reverse now. It's like winter here in Australia now, and I'm freezing. Like I'm colder than I ever was in the UK. And it's because nothing is set up from a heating perspective here. You know, there's no central heating. There's none of that. So I kind of got that reverse, culture shock of, being so used to how great things are in winter in the UK or freezing in Australia now, like even though the temperature is about the same here as what it is in the UK right now. So yeah, definitely different adjustments for sure.
Wow. And then, so you said you spent your first 6 weeks living in a friend's kind of lounge floor.
Yeah.
In those 6 weeks, what were your kind of key, I guess, objectives? Was it find a job first before finding an apartment, or find an apartment before finding a job?
Yeah, it was definitely find a job first. That's not how it ended up happening. I ended up finding somewhere to live before I found a job. I actually found it a lot harder to find a job than what I thought it was going to be. I thought, it's going to be really easy. I'll turn up in London. It'll be like tons of work. That wasn't the case. It was also back in the days before like laptops were everywhere, smartphones didn't exist, and I'd have to I'd have to walk to the internet cafe, once or twice a day to look for jobs and apply for jobs and, do all of that. It wasn't that sort of immediacy of what we have now. LinkedIn wasn't there. So it was like having to find a job kind of the old school way to an extent. That was different, sort of getting lots of, rejections from that perspective. And I ended up, quite fortunately, I got a job that was a temporal. I think it was supposed to be it was either 3 or 6 weeks. And then that ended up being the company that sponsored me, and the reason why I ended up staying in the country for as long as I did. So I was really lucky that I took that sort of temporary position. And I think it was pretty much within a week of that. It was a few days before I got that job. I'd also found a flat share as well, which was in Barron's Court in London. My friend that I was staying with lived in Hammersmith, so it was at least one stop down on the tube from the people that I started to get to know in those 6 weeks as well. So yeah, and I was really lucky from like a flat share perspective. I only looked, I think, at 1 or 2 places, and the people that I ended up moving in with, I ended up living with for probably it was close to 3 years, and still friends with one of them, today. So yeah, so that was really lucky that I landed on my feet with good flatmates there.
Incredible. What was your impression of your first time working in the UK compared to Australia? What was that like? Was there a work culture difference as well as a actual country culture difference?
Huge. Probably didn't realize it straight away. I think it kind of hit me a little bit sort of, further into work life. And, I think probably the one thing that does stick out in mind is like how many cups of teas, like, Brits drink every day in the constant tea rounds that, we're going around, and as a non-tea drinker, like I really felt a little bit sort of on the outer from that perspective, and always having to answer like, why don't you drink tea? That was interesting. And I think it was also, even though I was working in publishing and the company was great, it was a lot more structured than what I'd been working in. I'd been working like a media company in Australia, which is a bit more relaxed, and sort of the Australian culture from a work perspective, at that time, it's changed a little bit now since I'm back and working in it as well. But, very much Australians, work to live, whereas in London you kind of get the reverse a little bit, where it ends up being a bit more like live to work in some instances. But I think the other thing that really hit me from a work perspective was how much everybody go out together as well, and how much like the pub culture is intrinsic in the workplace as well. It's like let's go for a pint, like let's go for a beer. And, that's what people would do in the evenings after work. Whereas in Australia, where a lot of people drive to work and don't get public transport all the time, a lot more of that was focused around like in the evenings, you'd be playing sport or you'd be catching up with friends. It wasn't, with your work colleagues at a pub, which is, kind of, London life is very much, from like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday evenings is generally, if you say to somebody or just shout out in an office, does anyone want to go for a beer? There's always somebody who's going to say yes. So I think that was kind of a big sort of shift as well.
Well, yeah, that's very, very true, I think, of British culture of going for a pint after work, especially in cities where you don't have to commute by car. So you can get away with having a few pints after work. I think I'm more on the sports side of my evenings, but when I was younger, probably on more of the beer side. So it kind of mixes as I've gotten older. I've kind of transversed to wanting to spend more time exercising as I'm getting older. But so kind of you've done your kind of first 6 weeks, you found a job, found a house to live in. What other kind of things in your first maybe year or something did you find a bit difficult or find a bit interesting from the perspective of living in London?
Yeah, I think probably when you're thinking about moving overseas and going with no expectations is like the mindset to go with. And that's kind of, the mindset that I went with like, I want to be in London. I had like visions of walking over cobblestones and, things like that, which I did, heading to Covent Garden was like one of the first things I did when I moved to London to, be back there amongst the cobbles. But, it was very much more about like being open to, saying yes to a lot of things. I think that was sort of the key thing for that first, few months, and especially in the first year in London, is like when you're getting to know people and they're like, oh, come to this party, or do you want to come to dinner with my friends, or, do you want to go to this event? It's like saying yes to it, because if you're not doing things like that, then you don't get to meet other people and you're not building out like your social network. And, that was really important. And I made a very conscious decision as well, not to be one of the Australians who move from Australia and move into an Aussie flat share. That happens a lot. And, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people have had a great time living overseas with, their friends or, fellow, country folk. But for me, it was very much like, that's not what I want to do. I'd want to go overseas and I want to experience living, in a new country, and I want to meet different people. I want to meet the locals. I want to meet, other people. And, for me, that really started from those first few weeks, that I was in the country and thinking about where I was going to work and where I was going to live and, how I wanted things to be. Nothing really shocked me too much in the first few months. Probably outside of like how busy things were. I think getting used to traveling on the tube to work, I think was definitely an experience, and how crowded that was. Well, I guess the other thing is also like just being a bit more street smart. You don't have to have that sort of self-awareness and sort of, street smarts around you in Australia, but you definitely do in London. Like, it's something to, to be aware of. And unfortunately, it's becoming more important over the last 10 years as well. But like being aware of your surroundings and, not just like putting your bag over the back of your chair, which is very common in Australia, being aware that like both pickpockets and, thieves unfortunately exist and part of traveling. So being a little bit more switched on from that perspective, I think that took a little bit of adjusting, at the start as well.
Were you foul of any pickpocketing of theft, which made you kind of change your mind, or did you experience it through friends or anything, or from a first-hand experience?
No. Yeah, no, I was really lucky I didn't. And again, that came back to, some of the advice that I got before I moved to the UK too. And it was actually might have been a friend when I first moved to London said to me, get a handbag that has a zip, because it makes it harder for people who want to pickpocket you to actually getting into your bag. And so ever since that day, even to this day, I still have a handbag that has the zip on it. And I think that's kind of served me well, both in London, but traveling in other places. And when I did one of those Kentucky trips around Europe as well, we were on a bus in Rome, sort of our tour group, just a public bus. And one of the girls on there got pickpocketed, and it was like very easy for them to do it. And, and her bag was sort of like up under her arm, and the way that, they sort of distracted her and were able to pickpocket her was quite impressive, actually. But I think it's, once you're aware of like what can happen in a crowd, I think you become a bit more aware of like your belongings and where things are. And, I've had friends say like, oh, be careful of like who stood behind you, or, things like that. So very fortunate to have like people around me who spot things. And, the same thing for me when I've been out with friends as well, where it's been like, oh, you might just want to watch that person over there who seems like they're sort of pacing, or they're standing a bit too close to you when you're at the cash point, and things like that. So it's just, having that awareness and being smart.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, and very great advice as well for anyone traveling anywhere. People are, especially in the world at the moment, there's a lot more disparity of wealth, and therefore probably more desperation just to make ends meet. So people resort to having to survive, which is unfortunate. When you lived abroad, then was there any stereotypes you experienced of people towards you as an Australian, but also in reverse to British people? Did you see stereotypes that you had, or did they change?
I think from like a British perspective, I think I was a little unprepared for sort of the different classes that there are in the UK. And actually, I thought that, before I moved over there, that some of the stuff that you see obviously on TV and things like that, that's just a bit sort of, dramatized for like the show that you're watching. But then actually to see, that it does exist, and like that class system is there, it is prevalent, not just from like a social perspective, but also the workplace, as well. I think there was a little bit there. I think definitely, the whole, East London and, the Cockney kings and queens and things like that. It's great, like knowing that they're real. I think that was more the thing is that realizing that actually, especially in London and probably across the UK as a whole, is that there isn't like one stereotypical Brit. There are so many, people there, and people are different. If they're in North London, South London, East London, West London, it's so diverse and such a massive melting pot of not just, Brits, but actually people from all over the world. And I think that kind of like blew any sort of real sort of stereotypical, what I thought a Brit would be, out of the water, because it's, it's so much more than any one type, which was great. And then from an Australian perspective, I think so. There was always a lot of banter whenever the Ashes was on, for sure. I think that was definitely, there was always a lot of talk around that when it was Ashes time, a lot of sports chat. But yeah, I never felt, I was being labelled for being Australian or anything like that. You obviously, have the Mickey taken out of you, for sure, at different points. But, I used to give as good as I got. So, I think that's part of the culture as well. It's that banter that exists. And, there's such a great relationship between the UK and Australia, but it's, it's very friendly and it's a lot of fun. So, so there wasn't, I don't think anyone labelled me, and I certainly tried not to label other people.
No, definitely. It's a very good point you mentioned about sport, because it's one thing I was going to ask you about was I had another person on the podcast, Aoife, she was Irish and went to live in Australia, and she's saying how she kind of started watching rugby because of it. That's how she would make friends, would be watching rugby. Now, Australia's got quite a big heritage of rugby, and so does the UK. And I guess when the Six Nations are on, or when the World Cup's on or anything, and you might, go and watch a match and you just become so patriotic. I don't know if you experienced that, or any of your Australian friends did, whenever England played Australia in anything, whether it's football or rugby or cricket or and netball maybe as well, because it's quite a big sport now in both countries too.
Yeah, and I think it's, it didn't matter what sport it is, and I think it's quite a general thing for like Australia, and also for the Brits as well, is that if Australia's playing and you're an Australian, or it's definitely if it's against, a British team, you're super patriotic, towards Australia. And actually a lot of the time, especially the first few years that I was there as well, it's like, oh, if England's playing anybody else, you support whoever they're playing, not, even if it's not Australia. I think that rivalry is so intrinsic that, there's like within you, you can't support England, you can't support the Brits. It's just it's not something that you're brought up to, to be if you're Australian, because it's such a strong sort of, core that runs through all of us. But actually, as my time sort of there, carried on, I found myself like supporting England at the Euros and things like that as well. Like I watched some of the highlights this morning of like the match that was on last night as well. I'm very happy that, England made their way through the quarterfinals to the semi-finals. And, I really do hope it comes home. Like I think that would be great, kind of get caught up in that as well. But yeah, to this day, I will never support England if they're playing Australia.
You haven't been turned.
But I will now quite happily they're playing someone else. So yeah.
I mean, the point of supporting anyone but England also happens in the British Isles too. So the Irish or Northern Irish will also support anyone but England. The Welsh do, and the Scots definitely do. So you're not alone.
Yeah,
with
absolutely. And I've been. Sorry.
No, go for it. I had finished. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that, I've been lucky. I saw, I think it was quite early on when I was over there was like a friendly match where Australia was playing football. So it was a Socceroos against somebody. It wasn't one of the like English or, home nation teams. It was like another country. Sort of going to, it was at Shepherd's Bush, and, being there and, supporting them. That was great. And, I've been to Wimbledon like a number of times as well. It was always great that, I'd be able to like see like some of the Australians play as well. And that was always like quite a nice feeling to be, sat out on like Henman Hill as it was in the early days, and then turning it into Murray Mound later on, and, being able to watch Australians up on the big screen, or, if they were, one of the courts that I was lucky enough to, go and watch, if I had a ticket into, Centre Court or Court 1 or something like that. I think that's, there's a nice sort of like patriotic thing to do as well.
Massively so. Did you get to see much of the country as well? I know London is such a big place and, holds a lot of the population in Greater London anyway. Did you get to travel much to other parts of the country to see the better parts of the country, I would say, being a non-Londoner?
I did. I was really lucky. So the job that I first had when I moved to London, that I first got, they had a remote sales team. So I was based in London and we were headquartered out of London. We had like different teams that were sort of spread throughout the country. So I got to travel around. I got to go up to Manchester quite a bit, which was great. Got to go to, other places as well, from a work perspective, but then also did a lot of traveling myself. So I was lucky, it was sort of every 2 or 3 years, like my mum would fly over to visit as well. So we would, one year we got the train up to Scotland and then like drove back from Scotland, throughout sort of the north of England and like down through the Midlands and into Norwich, and see all like the beautiful countryside and, staying in some incredible sort of B&Bs. And we did the same in Ireland as well. My flatmate that I was first living with in the UK was from Cornwall. So I got to go down to Cornwall like a few times. And, absolutely love it down in Cornwall as well. So yeah, so it was a big thing. I think the only place I didn't go, and I don't know why I never did, was Wales. But yeah, I got to see pretty much everywhere else, which was great, and loved, how diverse it is, and definitely how friendly people are outside of London as well. Sort of getting out of that London bubble and out into the other regions was really key, and I loved it.
And I guess how cheap a pint was as well was quite important outside London. It used to half. Now it's about the same probably.
Exactly. Yeah. And I will say that the one thing that probably, and especially now at the moment and over the last 5 years or probably more, is that how expensive train travel is in the UK. And I think that for me, that was a real surprise. And actually, it wasn't until I moved back here and for me to do like a 2-hour trip or 90-minute trip from where I live now down into Sydney, it's about $7. So it's £4. And, you know, that same sort of journey, like in the UK, it's like 30 or 40, you know, pounds sometimes. And I think that's definitely a hindrance and something that people need to be aware of when they're traveling as well, is that, you know, it's not so cheap to travel in the UK. Yeah, it's cheaper, obviously, in Europe. The trains over there are super cheap as well. But, you know, I think that's something that, yeah, I'd love to see change in the UK. It's like bringing down that cost of, you know, train travel so more people can get out and explore all of the fantastic places outside of London as well.
I completely agree. Yeah, you can get very lucky with random times of trains for like £10 or something. But I live in a place called Leamington Spa, which is about 90 minutes away from London, and it's £28 with a rail card. So with a third off, it still costs you that much to go, albeit a return. So you get back with that same ticket. But it's expensive and it becomes a bit of a hindrance for sure. And you have to be quite privileged to be able to do that as much as possible. Which is hopefully the new government, which just got into power, might start changing that. I think there was talk about nationalising the railway service, so that might lower the price. Who knows? Wonderful. Was there any food is such a big part of living abroad and culture? Now, British food gets probably not a very good reputation internationally, which I think is a bit unfair because we have some great food, albeit the foods which kind of travel aren't so great. What was your experience? Did you go for a roast dinner? Did you have fish and chips? Did you have, you know, actual, like a Yorkshire pudding, best thing ever?
Yeah, God, yeah, that's one thing that I miss back in Australia now is like a Sunday roast and like pub lunch and Yorkshire pudding. I never had a Yorkshire pudding until I moved to the UK. I absolutely loved them and missed them. It was probably one of the key sort of food things that I miss for sure. And you're right. And I think when I moved over in 2006, and this goes back to like my very first day again in London, in that pub in Hammersmith, and we were getting lunch. And I was like, oh, just get a hamburger. And hamburgers are like a staple in Australia. Like, you know, they're great. They've got everything on them. You know, lettuce, tomato, beetroot, egg, onions, the works. Like they're, you know, as I said, renowned for their burgers. And this pub, I got the hamburger and it was like the patty, one piece of lettuce, and one piece of tomato, and it had very clearly come out of the microwave. And I was like, what is this? And I was like, oh my gosh. So that was kind of my starting point with food in the UK. And I was like, oh, it really is as bad as like what everybody says it is. But actually, you know, in the time that I lived there, I think one of like the greatest things about, you know, not just in London, but across the country in general as well, was, you know, how much like that food like scene really changed, and, you know, gastro pubs and like upping their level of like food that you can get in pubs, but, you know, the other restaurants as well. And I used to love going to loads of the tapas bars in London, and, you know, just how diverse the food really became. I think when I first moved there, you know, it was that stereotypical sort of like, oh, we get a curry, or, you know, you get a pie, or you get whatever. And then it, you know, it just became so much more. And that was one of the things when I left the UK to move back to Australia. I was like, oh, I really hope like the food's still going to be as good in Australia as what I'd gotten used to in the UK, and just what was there. And, you know, absolutely loved like trying out new places and new food. And I was lucky from a work perspective as well, that I worked in jobs where we did get to eat in really nice restaurants, whether or not it was like from team lunches or dinners or from client entertaining, and, you know, being able to eat in some really lovely places, but then also like local coffee shops and things like that too were big. And also the emergence of like Australian restaurants became a thing over the last sort of 5 or 10 years, like, you know, Bill Granger, has had its restaurants over there for quite some time, but there was more and more starting to pop up as well. And sort of the Australian brunch culture, I started to see become a thing a lot more in the UK too. So it was good to see sort of the Aussie influence, in London as well, which was really nice.
I don't think I've ever seen an Australian restaurant before, so I must not be seeing it properly. I might have to go look next time I go. Yeah, I'm so nice. Maybe I'm not going to the right places. Maybe that's the problem. I'll go find out. Next time I go, I'll put...
Definitely check out Granger & Co. if you're in London. And there are some restaurants under... there's a restaurant company called Daisy Green, and they've got loads of different restaurants and coffee shops around London, which are excellent as well.
I might have been by accident and not realised because, I'm just ignorant probably.
Yeah, it's one of the things, I guess, when you're doing it, seek it out, don't you? So,
Completely, yeah. When I was in Sweden, I looked for the British shop, and there was a pub which had the rugby on or football on, so you knew where to find things which you could get over homesickness, which is probably a big thing as well. So when you're living abroad and you're thinking, I wish I had X, Y, or Z, or I'm missing something, you can go and hunt out for things which make you think of home or kind of give you that kind of fix of homeliness. I don't know if you experienced much homesickness when you were there, but how was that? And did you have any kind of remedies to go over it?
I think, I did experience it. I didn't experience it all the time because I would come home to Australia in general sort of for Christmas every year. There was probably only maybe 4 or 5 times in those 16 years that I didn't have a trip home sort of each year. So I was lucky that I was kind of always regularly sort of checking in on, family and friends and being back in Australia for sort of 3 weeks every year, which was a great position to be in. Definitely when those sort of spells of homesickness hit, and that's normally when something happens at home and you can't be there for it. I think that's when the real sort of pangs of homesickness, kick in. And for me, it was always very much about music and listening to, Australian bands and artists I love. So my Spotify playlist, I could always tell now, when they started introducing rap, whether or not I'd had a homesick year, because it always depended on the amount of In Excess I'd listened to that year, and other bands as well. Definitely engage. But yeah, being able to listen to your soundtrack that you grew up with, things like that was really important. I'd always go and see Aussie bands in London as well, so that was something that I would do. And there used to be a shop in Covent Garden called the Australia Shop that would sell all food and everything from home. And it was quite a sad day when they closed down. That it was sort of an online store that did pop up as well. So being able to order and pay an exorbitant amount of money for selling your local sort of home sort of delicacies, and that was key sort of to dealing with homesickness as well. And I always had a jar of Vegemite in my cupboard, and thankfully, Tesco always sold that. So there was never a shortage of Vegemite, but that was sort of my go-to as well, having Vegemite on toast. Never, ever have I had Marmite, never will. So always Vegemite. So they're the key things. I think it's definitely, music and food, and then, catching up with another Australian as well, just being able to talk about what's going on and things like that too is important for dealing with homesickness. And it's much easier now to stay connected with home. When I first moved over, there not being any Facebook or, Messenger or anything like that. It was, having to write emails to people. Phone calls were really expensive, and, you didn't get to talk to people all the time. And I think that's one of the greatest things from a social media and technology perspective is just how easy it is now to stay connected with people back home and still sort of feel like you're part of it and talk to people whenever you need to. So that definitely helps. It helps with homesickness in the latter years I was in the UK.
Possibly, yeah, completely. And thank you for sharing those. It's not easy to kind of think back about how hard stuff can be in homesickness. It's a difficult time for most people, and yeah, thank you for sharing your advice on how to, I guess, deal with it. Is there anything else you wish to kind of discuss or mention about your time living abroad before we can go into the next section?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I make sure that I did when I was living overseas was just because somebody didn't want to go traveling with you or go to a concert with you or go and eat out or something like that, to not stay at home. So it was very much like being comfortable with like going to gigs by myself and, going on a holiday by myself and, checking out in European city for a weekend, being able to wander around and, going to a gallery, those types of things. And I think that's so important when you're living somewhere new as well, is that there's not always going to be, people around who want to do things with you. A lot of the time there is, which is fantastic, but, you're not always going to align up with what somebody else's like plans and agenda are, and like money wise as well. Like people don't necessarily want to spend their money on the same things you want to spend your money on too. And, for me, like in those first few weeks actually in the UK, I went and saw, the Red Hot Chili Peppers by myself. Like they were playing in Earl's Court. They're one of my favorite bands. And, my friend wasn't into them, who I was staying with, and I didn't really know her flatmate. So I wasn't about to get them to pay money to come and sing my favorite band with me. And, just going and doing that, it was only for me, it was like 2 stops on the tube to, to get there. And, that was great. And that kind of set me up for a lot of the other things that I did when I was traveling as well, like, just jumping on the Eurostar and going to Paris for, a couple of days, or, going to a retreat in Greece and, just being comfortable actually doing things by yourself and, not waiting for somebody else to say yes to do the things that you want to do. Like just get out and do those things because it's so important that you're enjoying your time overseas, because it goes so quickly. Even 16 years went super fast. And, you should just do the things you want to do without waiting for others to do it with you.
Wonderful. Well, what a great kind of way to end the segment, and with some incredible advice. And yes, just be fearless in certain ways, that's for sure, is a great opportunity to thrive. I guess we'll see you now for section 3. So welcome to section 3 of the podcast, which is not actually named, but essentially, Debbie, it's a review of your time. So the first question I always ask in this section is, if you could go back to your younger self before you moved and give yourself a bit of advice or change something, what might you say to yourself? What might you tell yourself to do more of, less of, or avoid?
Yeah, I don't think I probably wouldn't change anything, just only because I kind of that mindset of, you get your experiences that you have because of like the things that happen. So there's probably nothing that I would change from that perspective. What I would say to my sort of younger self before they sort of headed out on that trip is, one, to save some more money, like go with a little bit more cash. I think that's important, but I think that's just in general in life. It's good to always have a bit more. If you're in a situation where you can do that. 2, don't bother shipping any Australian winter clothes over, because you're not going to wear them. You can end up buying a whole new winter wardrobe in the UK, for sure. And then I think, the other piece of advice is, it's just have fun. And I had a lot of fun while I was over there, go with an open mind, say yes to, lots of things, and just be open to new experiences and new cultures and meeting new people and, living a different life that's, it is quite different to Australia. So yeah, definitely, have a lot of fun.
And would you give that some advice to someone else moving from not Australia, so anywhere else in the world, to anywhere else? Would you kind of pick up on the same points of open your mind and open your heart, and you'll be taken somewhere and you'll learn something?
It doesn't matter where you're going in the world. I think you need to go into a new culture with a complete open mind. It used to be something that I hated. I remember being on holidays. I think it was I can't remember if it was Spain or Turkey, and we're in sort of like quite an English resort, and sort of, seeing sort of the Brits on holidays, complaining about the fact that there wasn't a fry out, but there's like a full continental, European amazing like buffet spread there. And then there are some people quite loudly complaining that there's no fried eggs. And I think, you need to like be open wherever you go, that things are going to be different. They're not going to be the same. And actually, that's the joy of travel. And it's definitely the joy of living somewhere new is getting to experience new cultures and, meeting new friends and coming across things that you would never come across in your home country. And, it's really exciting and, it broadens your mind for sure. And, I think as soon as you go traveling, and especially if you live somewhere outside of like your home country, you're never the same person going back. It's impossible to, to be that same person who left. So yeah, it's just being open to it, which is the best way to travel.
Really, yeah, I think I unfortunately share a country with a lot of people who are the people you just described abroad, and don't bother learning any pleasantries in the language, or looking for the same foods or the same TV channels and what have you, which can be really good if you're homesick. But if you're there to travel and explore and have a cultural exchange, then the idea is you have to immerse yourself in a new culture. That makes you grow and empathize with people too.
Exactly. It's such a big part of it. And I think with how the world is today, especially, I think having empathy for people that are experiencing different things to you. And, I found that, living and working with people from different cultures and from countries where there could be some, tensions happening, or like the economic environment's not as great as what it is in UK or in Australia. And I think that definitely gets you thinking about the fact that the person sitting next to you could be really struggling with something that you've got no idea or no concept of, but actually through talking to them, you get to understand what's going on in other parts of the world and become really empathetic to, different situations, and you view things not as black and white and realize that actually there is a lot of gray there as well. So I think that's, really key.
Really, yeah. I think the world is not binary at all. It's different experiences for sure that we all kind of have in our arsenal of how we react to things, which is, as you mentioned, a good point of knowing that everyone is different. Everyone has a different reaction to every input we have, and we need to be caring and empathetic, or at least sympathetic if you can't be empathetic. Just respecting people's responses and people's reaction to certain things. Going forward then, in terms of your future, do you plan to live abroad anywhere else, or now you've moved back, is that kind of you set? Or
Never say never. I think for now, I'm pretty happy back here. I never intended to stay in the UK for as long as I did. So I'm kind of, happy with sort of the slower pace in life, and I've changed around my career a bit as well. So it's not as hectic as what it was when I was living overseas, but I'm very aware that I do get itchy feet. So I think for the short term, I'm wanting to, explore more of Australia, because I've seen like way more of Europe and, the rest of the world than I have of Australia. So I'm wanting to, to do some travel around Australia and, get to places I haven't been before. I think that's really, really important too. But when I'll live overseas again, I don't know. I've got my British passport, so it's always an opportunity, like in the future, and always a possibility. You just never know what's going to happen. So I definitely don't rule it out, but I don't have any plans, which I think my family and friends will be quite happy about, to jump on a plane and live somewhere else at the moment. I'm quite happy at home.
Wonderful. And then going back to your kind of professional life in terms of the world of marketing, has that been a good career for you in order to experience new countries and cultures? Would it be something you would advise someone who wants to live abroad to get into that field?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it definitely has been literally taken me around the world. A lot of the travel that I've done, especially around Europe and to the US, actually, bar one trip to America, and I've done quite a few, have all been work related. So I've been really lucky that, I've been in jobs where they've actually paid me to travel, and I've been able to tack on holiday days to a work trip and get to explore. And, that's made traveling a lot cheaper for me as well. That was a big part of, traveling around Europe as well, being in jobs where we had offices, in Sweden and Italy, Germany, France, Spain, probably some other places I'd forgotten, but I was really fortunate that, part of, my roles to the different companies that I've worked for have always involved travel. I've been able to go, I went to Cannes in the south of France for at least 3 or 4 different events. throughout my time living in the UK. So, yeah, for me, marketing definitely has afforded me the opportunities to travel and see the world. It, got me my visa. I was really lucky. The company that I did the temp job for went on to sponsor me for my work permit and then for my residency as well. And, the other side to that too is, it just doesn't get handed to you. There's a lot of hard work in there as part of that too, and a lot of sacrifice. But it was definitely, moving overseas was like the right decision from a career perspective for me. And I wouldn't change a thing from that perspective.
Wonderful. And kind of going forward onto your new career now, do you wish to share about the work you're currently doing and how people can find you and get in touch?
Yeah, so I'm a marketing consultant and advisor for small and medium-sized businesses, really focusing on companies that are local to me where I live in Australia, but also looking at SaaS companies and tech companies that are in scale-up phases and really helping them grow, like what I did throughout my career. And I'm also a qualified coach, so I do a lot of career coaching as well, both for marketers. And one of the other areas that I want to explore now is for expats, especially as those that are thinking about moving home too, because that is like quite a big, decision to make as well that impacts career too. So lots of different facets to what I'm doing now. But my website is www.gainsford.com, so really simple, and that's where people tend to find me and get in touch. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, so always happy to chat to people.
Wonderful, and they'll be linked below in the show notes. So if you do wish to go and find Debbie, please do click those and get in touch with her. I'm sure she'll help you out in whatever you need in that sense. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Debbie, for your time and so generous of you to spend your evening with me and my morning, I suppose, with the time zones. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, I have the new video function, which is great. If you have enjoyed the podcast, please let us know. Please comment or send us a message on socials. Please do let your friends know about if they also are Australian who lived abroad or would like to live in the UK from somewhere else. Then please do share it with them, and we can learn from that and grow. And hopefully we'll see you next time for the Expat Pod.